and welcome to the Gender Watch podcast with me, Regina Boli-Boti. In our episode today, we'll be examining the intersection of gender, media, and politics, a space that is often fraught with stereotypes and misrepresentation. Now, for decades, women have been underrepresented and at times misrepresented in political discourse, with the media playing a pivotal role in shaping these narratives, from reinforcing traditional gender norms to occasionally highlighting women's leadership. The media wields a very powerful influence. So we ask, why do these stereotypes persist, and how do they affect representation and participation? These questions we'll be answering when we speak to our guest in this episode. And in fact, let me introduce her. Our guest is an associate professor of communications and the head of the Department of Communication Studies at the University of Ghana. Her interests as a scholar, researcher, advocate, and practitioner straddle the areas of brand and organizational communications, media development, and gender. She is a fellow of the Media Foundation for West Africa and the co-chair of the steering committee of the Alliance for Women in Media Africa. Our guest for today is none other than Professor Abena Enimwa Yeboah Benning. Welcome, Prof.
Thank you, Regina.
I'm very excited to speak to you for one main reason. Most of the times when I'm on the page, I'm talking about the ALMA page, there are so many people there. Who is this? So it's good to finally put a name to the face. So yes.
I like that.
Yes, so I'm very glad to speak to you, and also because of this very important topic that we're talking about. Now, the Gender Watch podcast has a segment called Gen Stats, where we basically look at the data and the research and what they say in relation to the topic of the day. And I do understand that you've done some work as far as this topic is concerned. Digital spaces, the opportunity they provide for women, especially female politicians. It's an insightful thing for me to think about it, because not so many people think about digital spaces, what they offer, and also the other side, which is the dangers that they pose. So first, before we even go into the detail of that work, help us understand the motivation behind this research topic.
Well, I mean, the study you referred to was exploring the experiences of female politicians as regards online gender-based violence, and so attacks towards people that tends to be gendered meaning that women will experience it differently from the way men will experience it. And in this case, our focus was on female politicians. We wanted to understand what kinds of online gender-based violence attacks they experience, how prevalent it is, in what spaces do they tend to experience them, but also, more importantly, what have been their coping strategies? Because if they don't develop coping strategies, then these experiences eventually come together to push them out of these spaces.
Okay. Interesting. Share with us some of the highlights of this work. I'm interested in what you've talked about, coping mechanisms, but you can as well tell us the experiences that you've gathered based on this research.
Right. Quite a number of insightful findings. To begin with, to make the point that female politicians do suffer gender-based violence, which is online. So there's tons of research evidence about the experiences of gender-based violence in life, offline. But now the conversation has moved online because a lot more people are congregating in these spaces. And our evidence showed that actually these female politicians experience quite a bit of online gender-based violence. What we did was to study their personal spaces online. So for instance, if I'm a female politician, my Facebook page, my X page, something like. So we went there to look at what happens there so far as online gender-based violence is concerned. Then we also sampled some news stories published by online news media about these women and analyzed them for online gender-based violence. And then we spoke to some of these women as well. Across these three sources of evidence, we found that clearly these women suffer attacks online. as part of their political lives. And interestingly, quite a bit of the attacks they suffer come at the prompt of the news media. In other words, as we analyze the comment sections of stories posted about female politicians, if we juxtaposed what you saw in the comment section, the tone, the vibe, etc., and the attacks in there, they tended to agree with prompts in the story itself, which means that the news media is framing invitations towards attacks against female politicians, and that was quite problematic. If we wanted to unpack some of the online attacks that these female politicians face, comes in the form of hate speech. There are instances where their information is getting manipulated. They suffer harassment. They suffer cyberbullying. They suffer non-consensual sharing of their details. I mean, personal details, but somebody picks it and shares it online in a manner that sometimes can even put them in danger. If I were a politician and you got up one day and decided that because I've done or said something you don't like, you're posting directions to my house, that's a nice way of telling those who want to attack me that, by the way, this is where to find her. And they suffer all these things in various degrees and measures. But these are realities that these female politicians must contend with. We also found, in terms of what is driving these attacks, a number of reasons, among them being the fact that, well, Ghana is generally a patriarchal society.
Okay.
So the legacy of that patriarchal structure of our society lives on and carries itself into the digital spaces and forms itself into attacks against a female politician. Then, interestingly, there is also what seems to be a turf war that drives attacks towards female politicians within online media spaces. What would seem to be these women are eroding into spaces that should be preserved for men, because men should be the natural leaders. And so you see a lot of the attacks coming from that view, as though they're competition, and they shouldn't be in these spaces. So that's also quite a problem. The last driver of attacks against female politicians I want to isolate is the general political culture we run in this country. We run a political culture that is laden with insults, with attacks. And so anybody in politics should prepare themselves to be on the receiving end of this, more so if they happen to be a woman.
So from this research, are you able to understand why it's prevalent online? Does it have anything to do with the fact that it's faceless, anonymous? So yeah, I can say anything I want to say to a politician on social media. Nobody knows me.
I isolated some of the key reasons, but this was actually one of the reasons we spoke about, the possibility that this is coming because people can go into digital spaces, say what they feel like saying, and feel free in knowing that nobody knows who I am. I can even change my identity online tomorrow. I mean, Facebook can do all it can to, blacklist me. And tomorrow I can create a new identity and a new account. So that freedom that people have within digital spaces to mask themselves and to say things without the personalized atmosphere that we are having right now, it allows people, it empowers people to be able to attack female politicians.
Okay, what has been the coping mechanism for these respondents that you surveyed in your work?
So when we interviewed these female politicians, and by the way, these were people who are either in parliament or hoping to go there. There are people who had contested assembly elections, so quite a broad spectrum of women seeking different political roles or in different political roles. So we found from that research that when they face online gender-based violence, they've devised a number of tools for addressing them, for coping, navigating. Among them is the fact that sometimes they do tit for tat. Okay. You come at me, I come at you. I mean, insult me and I will give you equal measure. So sometimes they do that with the hope that it makes people back off, because this woman, if you go at her, you will get it some.
But as the evidence suggests that they back off, they don't.
We don't know, because the study didn't go that far. It just ended at the point of interviewing these women. So again, that's something we probably should look at. But there's quite a bit of retaliation on the part of these female politicians to try and stop people, to give a signal that this space, don't come and mess up here because I can mess you up. There are also those who say that it prompts them. It's so overpowering that sometimes they do a digital detox. So they take themselves off digital spaces for some time to try and recenter, regroup, get themselves in a better mental health mode before they come back within the very toxic digital spaces they must work in. And then there are also those who say that, well, whenever I face online gender-based attacks, I use it as an opportunity to educate. I take it that the person attacking me doesn't know any better, and there will be others like this person. And so I take it as an opportunity to talk to them, to explain to them that we can have this debate without it being insulting. We can have this debate without going after people's personalities. So different tools that they are using. There are those who report. The Cyber Security Authority, we even spoke with them in this study. They receive quite a number of reports from female politicians, because mind you, not everything we are saying here is about insult. We're talking online gender-based violence broadly. That I gave you examples, the harassment, the hate speech, so it's quite a broad spectrum. So there are different tools that these women have devised to be able to fight online gender-based violence. But you ask the question, does it help? Does it work? To the extent that it continues, online gender-based violence, we're not too sure that by itself it is solving the problem. There may need to be more systemic, structural solutions coming from the side of both the platform owners and regulators.
Okay, so far we've talked about the other side of the sword. Let's talk about the positives, because we know the era we're in, how technology, new media is driving conversations. For a female politician, what opportunities do these digital spaces create for them?
Oh, several. So you're looking at a situation where years ago, and I listened to the session with Professor Akosua Dakwa, where she was recounting some of the reasons women will not go into politics, key among them being the cost of doing politics. So you're looking at a situation where years ago, that cost, at least the part of that cost that comes from using mediated platforms to reach their audiences, because of the coming of the digital, that cost element has been removed significantly. So I don't need to go to a TV station and pay huge sums of money to talk to my constituents. I don't need to go pay for ads space on a radio station. On my Facebook page, my X page, on my YouTube channel, etc., I can push content, and if I'm strategic enough, my constituents or the people whose interest I seek would be able to come into contact. That is a big deal for female politicians, the access that digital spaces offer them to be able to come into contact with their constituents, with Ghanaians. It's very, very critical, and we shouldn't take that for granted. Again, it also helps the fact that the digital spaces enable female politicians to tell their stories, to package themselves and present the story of me to people so that they know what I stand for, what I am capable of, what I've been able to achieve, what I can do for them. So the digital spaces also offer a platform for these women to story tell and shape narratives. Again, we think that that is an advantage for the female politicians. Besides even helping them position themselves to the masses of Ghanaians and perhaps voters, it also positions them for political appointments. If you're visible within digital spaces and you're doing the right thing, you catch the eye of those who have appointive power, which for the moment tends to be men, but at least you become visible in a manner that carries meaningfulness, and perhaps one day soon you get called for some position that even gives you bigger grounds to build your political career. So the digital space has been very, very helpful to female politicians. We do not contend that. It just so happens that it's a double-edged sword, and so it comes with its downsides as well.
Okay, so how do we strike a balance? Because obviously from what you've said, there is an imbalance. There are positives, yet the negatives are weighing down and having the impact that many female politicians wouldn't want to experience. From your point of view as a researcher, what recommendations are you going to make based on this work you've done to strike a balance, to get us to that point where we're using digital spaces, but it's not coming at that much of a cost to us?
A number of things, and I pull them from different things we've done, actually. So on this project, we made some recommendations targeting female politicians themselves, and I would reference a project that I was part of ALMA when we did this project. So one of the recommendations is that female politicians should be helped to leverage the advantages of digital spaces. A lot of us are in digital spaces just trying to find our feet, but there are strategies for winning the game in digital spaces, and we believe that female politicians could be trained to better use these spaces to their advantage. ALMA did a project in which we got women who were contesting in the district level elections and trained them to be able to use digital space. So I'm saying this is possible, it's been done, and we need to scale it up so that a lot more women who have political career interest can be helped to thrive in digital spaces. But when we say that, it will seem as though we are saying that women are the problem, but the women have been being fixed forever and ever, and this is another fixing attempt directed at them. So it doesn't end there. We also need to make effort to sanitize our media spaces. I told you about the fact that some of the attacks towards female politicians are prompted by signals in the news stories, the headline, the lead. The way it is framed positions the audience to want to respond in a certain way. So conscious and recurrent education targeting media gatekeepers, reporters, etc., so that they are a bit more conscious in the ways in which they use words to prompt interpretation of the news about female politicians, but also everybody for that matter. So again, some attention needs to go towards the media spaces. When I told you that we spoke with the Cybersecurity Authority as part of the study, they receive reports of cyber attacks and they act on them. In fact, there's a whole coalition, I think, between them and other security agencies that work on this. But what we found as part of the study was that the law that empowers their work and their operations doesn't take any gender lens.
Okay.
But the challenges they must confront do wear gender caps. And so some attention also needs to go to policy and approaching policy with attention to the nuances in the challenges that policies are supposed to be trying to address.
Okay, you've spoken about reporters and media gatekeepers, and I want to ask a question about, now let's move from your work, let's look at traditional media, because of course, like it or not, they're very influential. What would you say, or how would you describe the current state of gender representation in Ghana's media as far as women in politics is concerned?
Allow me to, you've asked about the current, allow me to start a bit from the history so that it puts things in perspective. So when I did my master's thesis in 2009,
okay,
I had examined news coverage of men and women, and I had a gender lens. And so I was looking at how much attention is being given to men versus women in the news. At that time, what I found was that in terms of their representation in the news, men were 80%, women were 20%.
How about 2009?
Yes, 2009. In other words, if you took any substance of news reports that had been done, 80% of them were going to have men as sources in the news stories, whereas 20% would be females. So you see that big disparity. 2024, a paper has been published in which they were analyzing coverage now with a focus on female politicians, coverage of female politicians. And again, they are reporting that when it comes to prominence, their coverage on front pages, they had used Daily Graphic and Ghanaian Times. So if you compared female politicians' appearance on front pages of Times and Graphic, whatever period had been sampled, and to that of male politicians, it was 80 to 20.
Okay.
So from 2009 to 2024, the value is the same. Not much has changed so far as these pieces of evidence are concerned in terms of how much representation women are getting as voices in the news. Now, let's not confuse ourselves. We listen to talk shows, we see that women are visible, they're hosting programs, etc. But we're talking their appearances as news sources, as news actors, people that the news is about, people who are speaking in the news. It tends to be very, very, very imbalanced.
So that's for the sources. What about the subject? So is it the same? Are we seeing more stories about male politicians, for example, as compared to female politicians?
Absolutely. Male politicians get more coverage, attention than female politicians. Male politicians would tend to be treated as expert voices.
Okay.
Whereas female politicians will be invited to be talking more personalized things. And even when they are not, there will be references to their personal lives. So you will do a story about the female politician, and in writing the story, remind us she's the wife of Asamesi, and the male politician doesn't get that kind of reference. Okay. Exactly. So the roles they play when they make it into the news is gendered. The levels of prominence they are granted, male and female, also tends to be gendered. Even the chances of us hearing directly from them. So when I talk about something you've told me and I quote you versus I paraphrase you, one of them carries a bit more weight than the other. The quote allows the world to hear you and what you said. It gives prominence to your voice. The paraphrase is mediated. I am interpreting what I think you wanted to say. And we see from research that males generally, but I mean if it's males generally, would appear to apply to male politicians, will tend to be quoted more, whereas the females will tend to be paraphrased more. In other words, it would seem as though what the female is saying is not potent enough, so somebody has to do the mediation work of giving a vibrancy before it is given to the audience.
Okay. How much of this situation and this scenario you've painted is down to those who are making the decisions in the newsrooms?
Oh, quite a bit. Quite a bit, but not limited to that. Honestly, we pretend if we say that it is strictly about that, but I can unpack a bit because that's where you went to. So part of the reasons that women are underrepresented, sometimes stereotyped, misrepresented, you use that expression, in the media spaces is because of news cultures. How news is defined. There is a primacy of prominence, of time, of the bizarre, etc., etc. Prominence because over time it's been men who are in the positions of power. if we go for prominence as a definer of news, it is likely that there will be men who will occupy the seats of prominence and will make their way into the news through this door. We use timeliness also as a news value. Again, because of the social structure we have, women are in certain spaces, men are in other spaces. The places the men are tends to be easier accessible to the microphone that is looking for prominence versus where the woman is. It takes a bit more time. So for instance, if a TV producer says, I am constituting a panel for a show, it is easier to get a man to say, oh yes, I'll come to the studio. But on a Saturday morning, the woman in saying, yes, I'll come to the studio, must think of the stew that has to be made for the week, must think of the cleaning, must think of all sorts of considerations. And so when you bring timeliness as a key consideration, that woman is disadvantaged already because her concept of time is different from her male colleagues' ability to negotiate time. And that puts them at a disadvantage. So those are some of the, if you like, news practices that may underprivilege females and female politicians from the news. But I said there are other reasons as well, because again, we've come from a space where it's taken quite a lot of work to orient some women to become conscious that I can go for it too. A bit of that baggage is still on us. Quite a lot of women still think that space is too hot, it's just not for me. And so why do I go into to engage with the media house, to engage with the journalists? They may misquote me and people will insult me. I won't go. So we have reasons why we become reticent, why we won't put ourselves in the face of the camera, the microphone, and put our perspectives across. That while there are valid reasons, they tend to also put females at a disadvantage, because when the table is put there and people are being invited, we think we have reasons why I don't want to go because that place is too murky, or I don't have the time to be able to do this because I have this domestic responsibility that I must combine with my life, etc., etc. So newsroom cultures, news values, the posturing of news gatekeepers are critical, but there are also things outside of that space that may come into question as we think about representation and visibility.
Okay. Is the media amplifying these stereotypes? Is that a tough question?
Not a tough question, but I'm conscious not to also invite vilification against the media.
No, we're just trying to
address your question. I'm just saying I'll answer the question, but I'll counter it as well. Okay, so the media, yes, they do play a role. If for nothing at all, the evidence I've shared with you would suggest that the media do have something to answer for in terms of how women and female politicians are presented in the media, in the news, etc., etc. And we've discussed some of the reasons the media will be complicit in this. The things the media decide to focus on when talking female politicians, the issues, the focus, the consistent focus on their personal lives, their sex lives. It's sometimes you don't even know where it comes from. So there's a male politician, there's a female politician, and the female politician, we want to remember, is she married? How many times has she been married? Is her home still together, or is she divorced? We ask all those things of the female politician in the media spaces. But remember that the media have access to people's minds, ears, and eyes. And so what you present to people become the frames of reference by which they're forming perceptions about these females. So the consistent emphasis on the personal lives invites the audience's interpretation of female politicians from a lens that is rather inconsequential to their political careers.
Yes.
I want to lead. I want to be in governance. Judge me on my performance in that score. but we are too fixated sometimes with extracurricular variables, if you like, and that is problematic. That said, I like to counter a bit by saying, to be very honest with you, Ghana, we have the media we want. I say that to mean the audience is fed by what is thought to be what it is looking for.
Okay.
And so it would seem as though we too, we have certain tastes that the media are feeding, in certain unhealthy tastes that the media are feeding into. And so the general discourse in this country these days, if you listen, even outside of the space of gender, is the reality that is beginning to dawn on us that as a people, we are doing something wrong. Our fundamentals, our thought processes, our orientations, there's something fundamentally off that we need to begin to introspect and begin to change the way we do things. So if a media house posts a story that is very sensational and all about the female politicians, sex life, etc., and it will get 2 million views in 2 minutes, hello, next time that media house is going to do more.
Okay.
Because the audience is telling it, this is what we want. When they do that and we refuse to click on it, it will signal to them that perhaps now it's time to start telling us the political stories, the career achievements of people in our leadership spaces, so that we can judge them. What have they done before? What does it show us they can do? For which reason we must give them our vote. Okay. But if we continue to fixate on the Ghanaian expression is non-fa issues,
okay,
they will keep feeding us
major and
non-fa.
minors.
Yeah.
Prof, we're wrapping up, and as we do so, we're in an election year, just a few weeks before December 7. What have you noticed in terms of the media, women, and politics, even as we prepare for the polls? And what opportunities does this election present for a change?
I don't really know the hopeful way to answer the question in terms of what opportunity there is for change, because to some extent we're caught between the devil and the deep blue sea.
Okay.
There are two leading parties, one of which will by all means win the election, and I feel that as citizens, to some extent, the standards we've set for them are quite low. And so there isn't what seems to me a lot of pressure to solve our problems, because we've made it about very, very, very tangential issues. And so whether I have a lot of hope for change, I'm not too sure. But I'll comment on the space as regards female politicians. I think that there's a lot of opportunity now to wade into conversations and be seen and be heard, and to be seen to stand for some position or the other. We earlier discussed, for instance, the opportunity digital spaces allow them to be able to access their audiences. And so as we lead up to the election, people are interested, they are listening, they are watching news about things that concern Ghana and the election. And so perhaps female politicians can wade in and take advantage of the sheer space of discourse and make their voices heard. I think that there's something to be gained. We've spoken about online gender-based violence and the potential it has for censoring and quieting female politicians. I wouldn't go there lest I be attacked or I face this concern. So perhaps some of the tips that I have shared from the research are some of the coping strategies. This is not the good time to do the digital detox. I mean, we are in the heat of it. If you run away from it, people are having the conversations over your head. But not sure about the retaliation, but if it is working for people. Oh, another one too that I should have mentioned was somebody who says she sets rules for her personal digital spaces. So every so often she will come there and tell them that this is my space, this is what I allow here. If you don't plan on doing that here, I beg, so you set sort of rules of the game for conversations within your spaces. It saves you from encountering unhealthy content, at least in your spaces. The larger news media spaces may still prompt audiences in a certain direction, but at least you're able to create some sanity within your spaces as well.
Okay, so but finally, for traditional media, what would be your advice going into election 2024?
When we've met with media practitioners, gatekeepers, etc., we keep emphasizing the point that the same rules cannot be used to correct a problem that doesn't seem to come from a level playing field. So the considerations for who to invite to speak, who to give attention to, may need to change just a little bit. Okay. So for instance, when you are empaneling for a discussion, instead of easily going off with that excuse of, oh, the women, they will say they won't come, and we use that as a reason to not reach out even to some women at all, perhaps to say, how can we help them be able to come?
Okay.
So that if they can't come into the studio, and we can let them plug in virtually. Or we can even go and record their voice and at some time during the show play it. Then we are doing a little bit more to create spaces for the women to be able to surmount the challenges that their other role puts in front of them and still be able to gain access into the space.
Okay. Thank you so much, Prof, for your time on the Gender Watch podcast. It's been an insightful conversation.
Hope so.
Yes. So this is how we end today's episode of the Gender Watch podcast, brought to you by the Aya Institute for Women, Politics and Media. Today we've been talking about gender, media and politics, and our guest, Professor Abena Enimwa Iboa Benin, has been helping us understand the status quo and then proffering solutions to what can change even as we head into election 2024. In wrapping up, I just want to tell you that you have a role to play in ensuring that we expand the lens with which we view female politicians. Remember, they are more than their appearances and their personal life. They are all about their professional capabilities. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm Regina Boliboti.